Welcome to Last Memories. I'm Patrick, and today I'm bringing you the dumbest human deaths caused by food, situations that make me pause every time I eat, because something as simple as eating should never cost someone their life. From a young streamer who thought she could handle an ultimate challenge to a student who gave in to peer pressure and swallowed something that destroyed her in the most brutal way possible. It was August 14th, 2017, in Tempe, Arizona. The desert heat still hung in the air as evening settled in, the kind that makes you stay inside with the AC running. Inside a small apartment complex, 22-year-old Prue Quint set up her camera in her cramped kitchen, getting ready for what she called the ultimate spice challenge. Prue worked part-time at a clothing store, but most of her energy went into her small streaming channel, where she pushed herself through increasingly intense food challenges. What started as eating spicy snacks had turned into a competition with herself to go further every time. Her viewers loved watching her struggle through the heat, and the moments where she coughed or gagged usually brought the most donations. That night, her chat had been daring her to make what they called the world's spiciest combination. Instead of researching safe limits, she decided to improvise. She ordered dried Carolina Reapers, ghost pepper powder, pepper extract, and a bottle of Satan's blood hot sauce covered in warning labels. Her plan was to mix everything into spicy Korean fire noodles, creating something far beyond what most people would attempt. The warning signs were obvious. She joked online about ignoring safety instructions, posted photos of the labels, and laughed about how dramatic they looked. She didn't understand how strong pepper extract could be, and she refused to have anyone with her because she wanted to prove she could handle it alone. Her phone sat on a tripod, facing the counter, where a metal bowl waited. The mixture looked almost black, thick, and oily, barely resembling food. The smell made her eyes water, but she laughed and told the chat that meant it would be perfect. The stream started just after 8. She took a huge bite right away. Within seconds, her face turned red, and she started coughing, eyes watering so badly she could barely see. The heat hit harder than she expected, but instead of stopping, she forced herself to take another bite, then another. The chat filled with laughing emojis and donations. Milk sat next to her, but every time she tried to drink, she was coughing too hard to swallow. The extract coated her throat, making her gag as her stomach turned. The more she pushed through it, the worse it got. After another bite, she bent forward, coughing hard. She grabbed the milk, tried to gulp it, and choked. Then she vomited. It splashed onto the counter and floor as she stumbled back, trying to step out of frame. Her eyes were watering so badly she couldn't see. Her foot hit the spilled milk. She slipped instantly. Her shoulder hit the counter. Then her head struck the edge before she dropped to the floor, stunned and gasping while her body kept trying to vomit. On her back, she tried to roll over, but another wave came up before she could move. Some of it went into her mouth and nose while she was still trying to breathe. She coughed violently, but the burning mixture made it uncontrollable, her throat tightening as she struggled for air. The sounds changed from coughing to wet, desperate gasps. The spice itself wasn't poison, but the reaction spiraled out of control. Between the fall, the vomiting, and the irritation, she couldn't get a full breath. The chat kept scrolling, most people thinking it was part of the challenge. A neighbor heard the crash and coughing. When there was no response, they called 911. Paramedics forced entry and found her unconscious on the kitchen floor with shallow breathing. They cleared her airway and rushed her to the hospital, but she had gone too long without enough oxygen. Doctors stabilized her heart, but the damage to her brain was severe. She never woke up. The report listed the cause as accidental asphyxia after aspiration of vomit, triggered by the extreme food challenge and the fall that left her unable to protect her airway. She had been alone, had consumed a highly concentrated pepper mixture, and no one was there when the reaction got out of control. What gets me is that this started as something people were watching for fun, and it turned into an accident nobody on that stream expected to see. Her final stream stayed online for hours before it was removed. Clips kept circulating, a young woman laughing into a camera, daring herself to go further than she should have, never realizing how fast something meant to entertain people could become the last thing she ever did. A lot of you said in my last video, this could never happen to you, but stories like this prove how quickly things can go wrong. And for me, the next case is even harder, because this time there was no camera, no challenge, no performance. Just a tired warehouse worker making hot chocolate at 2 in the morning. It was March 3rd, 2016, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The overnight shift at the industrial warehouse was in full swing, with the hum of machinery and distant beeping of forklifts echoing through the massive building. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows between tall stacks of pallets, giving the place that strange, empty-feeling warehouses get in the middle of the night. 34-year-old Kevin Scad had been working the night shift there for almost 3 years, operating a forklift and moving inventory across the floor. He was known as a reliable worker who showed up every night, did his job quietly, and stuck to the same routines to get through the long hours. One of those routines was making hot chocolate during his break to stay awake through the slowest part of the shift. The break room sat near the back of the warehouse, a small space with plastic tables, a hot water dispenser, vending machines, and a cabinet where workers kept snacks, drink powders, and supplies. The problem was that the same cabinet was sometimes used by the night cleaning crew to store materials for the floor machines when they didn't want to walk back to the maintenance closet. Earlier that night, a maintenance worker placed a white plastic container inside the cabinet after refilling one of the industrial scrubbers. The container held powdered cleaning compound used for the floor machines. It had no label, just a plain white lid, and looked almost identical to containers some employees used for drink mix. I honestly can't get over the fact that something as simple as a label could have saved this man's life. Kevin had a habit of not paying attention to details when he was tired. Co-workers later told investigators he would often grab whatever container was closest instead of checking the label, especially in the middle of the night when everyone was half awake. Around 2 in the morning, Kevin walked into the break room for his usual drink. The lights near the cabinet were dim, and the white container at the front looked exactly like the one he kept his chocolate powder in. Without thinking much, he scooped several spoonfuls into a mug and filled it with hot water from the dispenser. He stirred it, noticing the mixture foamed more than usual, but assumed the powder had clumped from humidity. He lifted the mug and took a large swallow. The reaction was immediate. Kevin dropped the mug and grabbed his throat as the caustic liquid burned his mouth and tongue. He started coughing violently, spitting foam and liquid onto the floor as the chemical damaged the tissue in his throat. The pain forced him to his knees, knocking a chair over as he tried to breathe through the burning spreading down his airway. Co-workers heard the crash and ran into the break room to find him on the floor, gasping and unable to speak. His lips were already swollen, and his breathing sounded strained and high-pitched. One called 911, while another tried to keep him upright as he struggled to pull in air. Paramedics arrived quickly and suspected chemical ingestion when they saw the container on the counter. They gave oxygen and rushed him to the hospital, but the damage to his throat and airway kept getting worse as the swelling increased. At the emergency room, doctors worked to control the swelling and inserted a breathing tube when his airway began to close. The burns extended into his esophagus and upper airway, and despite treatment, his condition continued to deteriorate over the next several hours. Kevin died later that morning after complications from severe caustic chemical burns and airway obstruction. I keep coming back to the thought that Kevin was just trying to get a warm drink to make it through his shift. Something about that makes this one hit me harder than the others. The investigation determined that the cleaning compound had been stored in an unlabeled container inside the food cabinet, violating safety rules. Inspectors cited the company for improper chemical storage, and the incident was later included in a workplace safety report as a preventable fatal accident. I spent hours thinking about Kevin's case and kept coming back to the same thought. The way I see it, this is the most preventable death I've ever covered, and that's exactly what makes it so haunting. For me, The next story will test your patience differently, because this time the danger wasn't hiding in an unlabeled container. It was hopping around in the backyard. It was July 22nd, 2018, in Gainesville, Florida. The summer heat was heavy and humid, the kind that makes the air feel thick. Behind a worn-down apartment complex on the edge of town, the evening sun stretched across a patch of overgrown grass near a stagnant drainage pond, the dull green water buzzing with insects in the thick air. 27-year-old Lana Mott worked at a local diner, spending long shifts serving comfort food to truckers and college students passing through town. Outside of work, she liked posting videos online, especially clips of herself cooking strange things she found outdoors. Her friends always said she had no fear when it came to trying new food. That evening, Lana was hanging out behind the apartment building with two friends near the chain link fence separating the lot from the drainage pond. The area had become overgrown over the years, turning the back lot into a small stretch of wild Florida where frogs, insects, and stray animals showed up almost every night. Near the edge of the pond, they noticed several large toads hopping through the grass. These weren't the small frogs people usually saw after rain. They were thick-bodied and slow-moving. One of her friends joked that people online cooked frogs all the time and wondered if they could do the same thing. None of them realized the toads common in that part of Florida were cane toads, a species that produces a powerful toxin from glands behind the head. The toxin can be dangerous if it gets into the mouth, eyes, or bloodstream, and even handling the animal without washing your hands can cause problems. Lana thought it would make a good video. She set her phone on a patio table while they brought out a small camping stove and frying pan. They skinned the toads the way they thought you would prepare any small animal, not knowing the toxin sits in glands behind the head and can easily spread during handling if those glands aren't properly removed. Pieces of meat went into the pan with oil, already contaminated during preparation, as she talked to the camera about trying something wild from behind the apartment. When the meat finished cooking, she took the first bite. At first, she laughed and said the taste was bitter. She wiped her mouth and took another piece, trying to act like it wasn't bothering her. Within a minute, she started coughing and said her tongue felt numb. She kept rubbing her lips, complaining about a metallic taste that wouldn't go away. Then her hands started shaking. She leaned against the fence, breathing faster, her face turning pale as nausea hit. She vomited into the grass and tried to stand, but her legs didn't respond right. Her friends thought she was just getting sick until she grabbed her chest and said her heart felt like it was racing. The toxin had already entered her system through contaminated meat and handling during preparation. She became confused, struggling to speak. Then her body stiffened before she dropped to the ground. One friend called 911, while the other tried to keep her awake as her breathing became uneven and her pulse erratic. Paramedics arrived within minutes and suspected poisoning when they saw the remains of the toads near the stove. Lana was still alive, but disoriented, her heart rhythm unstable as they rushed her to the hospital. Doctors tried to stabilize her through the night. The toxin affected her heart and nervous system, causing repeated irregular heartbeats that were difficult to control. Her condition kept getting worse. Lana died early the next morning after going into cardiac arrest caused by toxin exposure. I think the part that stays with me is that her last video is still out there. She's laughing, acting like everything is normal, and it's unsettling to realize nobody there knew they were watching her final hours. The investigation confirmed the animals were cane toads from the drainage pond behind the apartment complex. Wildlife officials explained the species carries bufatoxin in glands behind the head, and improper handling or ingestion can cause serious poisoning. The incident was ruled an accidental death caused by toxin exposure after eating wild amphibian. The apartment management posted warnings about wildlife near the pond afterward, but by then, the damage had already been done. I personally think Lana's story is one of the clearest reminders that cooking something doesn't always make it safe. In my point of view, this is the story that stayed with me the longest, because this time the risk was there, and nobody realized how real it was until it was too late. It was May 9th, 2015 in Fresno, California. The weekend farmers market had taken over a large parking lot on the edge of town, rows of white tents across the asphalt, while the late morning sun beat down hard enough to make the air shimmer above the ground. The smell of fresh fruit, grilled food, and hot pavement mixed together, the kind of scene that felt harmless and familiar to everyone walking through. 19-year-old Hannah Brooke was a community college student working part-time at a bookstore while taking classes during the week. She had always been the type to go along with whatever her friends suggested, especially when it came to trying new food. A few years earlier, she had dealt with liver problems after a bad infection, something she had mostly recovered from. But her doctors warned her to be careful about certain foods, especially raw seafood. That morning, she met up with two friends at the market, planning to walk around, grab lunch, and head home before the heat got worse. They moved from stall to stall, sampling fruit and snacks, until they reached a small seafood stand near the end of one of the rows. The booth was simple, just a folding table with a cooler full of ice and a handwritten sign advertising fresh oysters. The vendor stood behind the table, shucking them open, one at a time with a short knife, placing them on paper plates. It looked like any other small market setup, but there was no visible temperature gauge in the cooler and no health inspection tag posted anywhere on the table. One of Hannah's friends ordered a plate and started eating them right there. They joked you weren't supposed to come to a farmer's market without trying something raw at least once. Hannah hesitated at first. She had never liked raw oysters, and she remembered being told to avoid them because of her past liver problem. But after a few minutes of teasing, she gave in. To me, that moment of giving in is the most painful part of this whole story. Not because Hannah was weak, but because she was just trying to be a normal 19-year-old with her friends. She ate 3 oysters beside the stall, trying not to think about the texture as they slid down her throat. The shells sat in the cooler, surrounded by melting ice and water warming under the sun, something none of them noticed at the time. For the rest of the afternoon, everything seemed normal. They kept walking through the market, talking and laughing, and later that day, Hannah suddenly stopped and pressed her hand against her stomach. She said she felt sick, like something was twisting inside her. At first, they thought it was nerves or food she wasn't used to. Then she started sweating heavily, even though they were standing in the shade. Her skin turned pale, and she said she felt dizzy. A moment later, she vomited onto the pavement, the force of it making her drop to one knee. When she tried to stand, her legs shook so badly she had to lean against a parked car. Her breathing became fast and shallow, and blotchy red patches appeared on her arms and neck. One of her friends called 911 as Hannah slid down onto the hot asphalt, barely able to stay conscious. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, where doctors suspected a severe bacterial infection linked to raw shellfish. Blood tests showed signs of sepsis developing, something that can happen when certain bacteria enter the bloodstream, especially in people with liver disease or weakened immune systems. By the evening, her condition had already begun to worsen, and through the night, it kept getting worse. The infection spread despite antibiotics, causing her blood pressure to drop and her organs to begin failing. She was moved to intensive care, but early the next morning, her heart stopped. Hannah died less than 24 hours after eating the oysters. The investigation found multiple food safety violations at the seafood stand. Inspectors reported the oysters had not been kept at a safe temperature, and the vendor lacked proper documentation showing where the shellfish had been harvested. Officials concluded the infection was most likely caused by bacteria commonly found in raw oysters, which can be deadly for people with liver conditions. The stall was shut down and the vendor's permit revoked, but the case was recorded as an accidental foodborne death. What makes Hannah's story so unsettling is how ordinary it started. A hot day, a crowded market, a few friends daring each other to try something new, and within hours, 3 oysters turned into an infection her body couldn't survive.